Chapter 37. No One POV. Past Life 16. As if you had always hated waiting, he never is the patient type. Unlike his best friend, who can keep a calm attitude for hours. It has been more than 3 hours since the demon doctor has entered the critical unit. There are no whereabouts about anything. The terrain doctor was also in there. Surprisingly, both the doctors started to work together without any difficulty. The door suddenly opened as both of them exited the room. While the demon doctor looked void and serious, the other doctor had a worried expression. As if he jumped and ran to the doctors in worry. "I have never seen anything like this," Dr. Mish said as worry filled the king. "What do you mean?" he asked as the demon doctor sighed. "Her vitals and everything is normal. No sign of any disease, infection, or anything. Theoretically, she should be healthy, but she is not. Her power is unstable, it seems, and because of that her body is being strained," he said, looking at the king with sadness. "What can we do?" the king asked, his voice quivering. "We don't know. We will do every method to save them both. We will also research this matter. For now, stay beside the queen and take care of her," the terrain doctor said as the king nodded mutely. "Is both in danger?" Wilfred asked as the doctors nodded. "Do not lose hope, my king. Princess Diane is the bravest girl I ever come across. Be by her side and give her strength. I would recommend not letting her use even a little magic. It might trigger her," the demon doctor said to the king before walking to the critical unit. "Also, we haven't told her about the condition," the demon said as he nodded without even turning back. His eyes teared up as he saw the queen looking at her with a small smile. "Why are you crying? Is it because we are having a baby?" she said with a goofy grin as he huffed a cry before running to her. He hugged her and cried as she laughed and ran her hand through his hair. "I'm so happy. I have always dreamed of this. A family, just us and our children. I can't believe I have a chance to choose my destiny. I can't believe I chose my destiny with you. Thank you. Thank you for this," she said as the king buried his face more deeper to her neck and kissed, crying. "Let's not stop with one," she laughed. She pushed the king away just to see his face. She frowned and tilted her head, confused at her husband's reaction. "I love you," he said as she smiled, wiping his overflowing tears. "I love you too," she said as she put her forehead on his, closing her eyes as tears of joy fell down. "Come here," she said as she hugged the king, both of them crying, but surely for different reasons. The doctors and Wilfred watched from afar at the scene in front of them. Their heart was beating fast, and their eyes were filled with tears. "Is there any way to save their happiness?" Wilfred asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry," the demon doctor whispered sadly for the girl, who was like his own daughter. 5 months later. "Careful," the king said as he aided the queen to put the shoes. "I'm fine. I'm not sick, just pregnant," the queen says it as the king looked away and nodded mutely. "I was joking," Diane said as she put her hand on his chin, making him look at her. She has no idea what is wrong with her king. He always stayed beside her and takes care of her. She told him she will be fine alone, but he refuses to leave her. He left all duty to Wilfred, who without any hesitation took the burden. Diane knew something was wrong with her. Her body was feeling so weak, and she somehow knew deep inside it was not due to pregnancy. Her husband's behavior proves it also. He was also very moody. He would cry when he's alone, thinking something, and he would cry when he thinks she's sleeping. She would always feel his tears fall on her cheek, and she would hear him sobbing as he hugged her tight. He would shower kisses, always making sure his lips linger longer. But she never opens her eyes and pretends to sleep. It worried her of how ghostly and weak her love looked. Dark circles covered his eyes, and he was thinner. His eyes were red from crying and looked weak, but still, he runs around for her age. He gets angry and sad when I joke or talk about being sick or not being beside him. Suddenly, her godfather and demon doctor, Mish, walked in, bringing her back to reality. He had a small smile, but she noticed how his smile didn't reach the eyes. "It's a baby girl," he said, as the queen smiled as she unconsciously squeezed her husband's hand. She felt him shaken, and she turned to look at him. Her eyes widened as she saw him crying. He was sobbing and crying hard, which made her worry. She once again felt her power inside stir. It was another problem she is facing. She couldn't seem to control her powers. and using the power made her weak. "Azzy," she called, ignoring the pains. She took his face in her cold hands. He was still shaking and crying, his tears flowing down his cheeks to her hand. "What is wrong?" she asked, as he suddenly attacked her into a hug, shocking her. "I don't want to lose both of you," he whispered, as she looked at the doctor, who was looking away with tear-filled eyes. She smiled and held him tight to her. She guessed it right. She won't be around for long. Chapter 38. No One POV. Past Life 17. "Bring her in fast! Move, move!" The demon doctor screamed as they pushed the stretcher with the pregnant queen to the critical room. "She's in labor!" the terrain doctor shouts as the nurses started preparing. "Please be all right, please," the king repeated as he looked worriedly at his wife, who was thrashing and breathing hard. "Please, stay behind," the demon doctor said to him as they entered the critical unit. Please be okay, please be okay," the king said as he started to work from one end to the other. "Calm down, Azzy," Wilfred said as he tried to calm the king, but all was in vain. "It's too early. It's a month early, damn it," he said worriedly to his best friend. "We know, but she is strong. She will live, and so will the princess," Wilfred said as the king nodded in hope. "Yes, you're right. If that didn't happen, I know what to do," he said, determined, as Wilfred looked at him in worry. Hours passed by, and no news. The doctors have not come out, but nurses kept going in. Xavier was frustrated as he kept walking from one end of the corridor to another. When the terrain doctor walked out, Xavier attacked him and grabbed his collar. "Is she all right? What took you so long?" he asked as the doctor voiced the king's eyes. "I'm sorry. We did our best. She's getting weaker and weaker," he said as the king looked at him, heartbroken. "I have to see her," the king said as I walked, but the doctor stopped him. "Don't make her stress too much," he said as the king mutely nodded before walking in. The room was lightly lit by a glowing blue orb. She was lying on her bed. Her eyes were closed, and her already pale skin now looked much more deadly. Her collarbones were even more visible, and she became more and more skinny. The only thing visible more was that a fully round stomach. Xavier heard aid, as he saw the love of his life lay on the bed with all sorts of tubes and medical equipment. There was a light blue glow on her face from the orb. Xavier sat on the chair next to the bed and lightly struck her cheek. Her eyes moved, and she groaned before slowly opening her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice weak and hoarse. "How are you feeling?" Xavier asked. She gave a small smile. "I'm okay, Azzy," she said. She reached out her hand and wiped a tear hanging under the king's eyes. He knew he was lying. She felt far from okay. Her eyes screamed pain. "Azzy, I have one request," she said as he nodded. "Anything. I would do anything for you," he said eagerly as she smiled. "If you have the choice to choose between me and the baby, choose her," she said as his eyes widened. "What?" he asked, frowning as she smiled. "There won't be any choice," he said as he smiled at her sadly. "I know, but if ever you have a chance to save one of us, save her," she said, shaking his hand and giving a light squeeze. By now, Xavier was a crying mess. He doesn't want to choose. He wants them both. He wants his love and daughter. Promise me you will give her a beautiful childhood. None like his, only happiness. Please," she said as he nods. "Promise," he said as she gave a white smile. He took her hand and put his face on top of it, trying his best not to cry. Suddenly, he felt her shiver. He immediately looked up to see her breathing hard. "Diane," he asked, shocked, as put her hand on her chest and curled up, ignoring the wires she was connected to. "Doctor!" Xavier screamed as he pressed the emergency button. "Diane! Diane!" He kept shouting her name. He tried to touch her, but he had to move back as it burned her skin. Her horns emerged from her head, and her skin started having curves and designs of red. Her teeth had fangs, and her eyes were black with a red iris. She was turning to her true form. The doctors came rushing in. They tried to touch her, but they also got themselves burned. "Shit, a demon form," the demon doctor said before his eyes shined. They glowed a deep gold, and his body color changed to green. A former tail and wings and horn erupted from his skin. Everyone gasped and moved back at the whiff of his demon wings. He grabbed a hold of Diane. She kept struggling. "We are losing her," the terrain doctor said, looking at the heating equipment. I know, the demon doctor said in a strain, as he kept trying to calm her powers down. The baby is dead, one of them said, as Azivir felt his world break down. Diane screamed and started to use more and more power, as if the loss of her child made her completely insane. Azivir watched in horror at the scene happening. It was torturous. His body was frozen as he took in each and every scene. The horrid scene was imprinted deep in his mind. We are losing the mother fast, another nurse shouted at his head as he snapped to the heart monitor. Suddenly, the line flattened, and the room became quiet except for the straight line beep. He took a step back in horror. Everyone in the room turned to him in sadness. She shook his head and took another step back. He needs to save them, at least one of them. The consequence will be great, but he didn't care. His light has died down, and he wants it back, even if it's a little happiness. He ran out of the critical room. He pushed Wilfred, who was waiting for him outside. Azzy! He screamed, but the king turned a deaf ear at him as he ran to the place where he knew the last hope of saving them lay. Reaching the forbidden corridor, he turned to the room where the stone he once stole lies. The warriors who guarded the room looked at him shocked. Your Majesty, the one in the right said, looking at the red crying breathless king. Both of you are dismissed. Go, the king said, as they looked at him confused. But nevertheless, the trust and obedience for their king led them to bow in respect and go away. The king didn't even acknowledge their nod as he walked straight through the magic wall. He was once again met with the forest like the room, but this time, the forest was not as lively as the previous one. It was dull, and you could see it was unstable. The power stone was weak. It was no doubt. The shine coming from the crack proves it. Azivir didn't waste a single moment as he went straight to the waterfall and grabbed the stone. The scene around vanished, and the glow from the white stone died down. The stone was warm in his hand as he held it tight, his heart beating fast. He has learned that the stone is capable of bringing people alive, but it can only bring one. Only one. That means one of them will be dead. The words his wife said rang in his head. Save the child. Her voice came in his head as he squeezed his eyes shut. But I will lose you, he whispered heartbrokenly. But he promised his wife, and he wants his daughter to have a beautiful life. I wish for my daughter to be back alive. I wish her back. Please, he said, without even thinking twice. He will lose his wife, but he promised to save our child. Give her a life of happiness. Give her a life she deserves. The stone suddenly shone up normally as the king's eyes widened. The pearl stone rose from his hand as it became brighter and brighter. Suddenly, it exploded as the king was sent flying back to the wall. His head hit hard on the wall, and in blur, saw the stone break and the power rushing out the door before everything around him turns blank.